Well, that was music by Sir Michael Tippett, Dance Clarion Air, with the Finzi Singers, and it's a piece that will be included in a programme of British 20th century choral music, which will be performed by the Hong Kong Bach chamber choir, conducted by Nicholas Cleobury, who is a renowned British conductor and has particularly respected for his work as a choral director. And I'm delighted to say Nicholas Cleobury has just joined me on the phone. Nicholas Cleobury, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome back to Hong Kong.
Thank you.
We were just listening there to Michael Tippett's Dance Clarion and Air. Am I right in saying that you knew Michael Tippett personally?
Yes, very well. I was lucky enough to meet him as a student, and right through to his death, really. I worked with him, preparing concerts for him, sharing concerts with him, recorded all the choral music actually with him there, including that Dance Clarion Air which you've just played. So, no, one of the great privileges of my life, really. He was a very, very great man and a very great composer, and, one of those lovely things that sort of happens,
Would you say that that particular piece, Dance Clarion Air, is somehow representative, is typical of Tippett's style?
Typical and not representative, if I can split this time of the morning. It is. It brings in his love of madrigals, his love of Henry Purcell, his love of bouncing rhythms and of word painting and of sheer joie de vivre and joy of singing about, in this case, the wonderful air and the sound on the seashore and the morning light and so forth. He had this wonderful vision and he brought it through. Representative, not so much, because it's a reasonably madrigalian sort of Tudor piece that he wrote. I think he wrote many more tougher pieces, but all the finger marks are there, all this unbelievable use of words and colour, and it just woke me up beautifully when I heard it just before you talked to me.
It's quite challenging, isn't it, for the singers to get that bounce and drama and joie de vivre?
It is, but once you get what he's on about, you can't stop. It's infectious and it works. I've done it a lot, and it's a piece I always love coming back to. It's lovely to be able to come back to it and present it here in Hong Kong.
Would you say that his greatest gift, perhaps, was for writing for the human voice?
Yes, I think he wrote beautifully for everything. He didn't care too much whether you talk to singers or players. He was not always quite as mindful as his great near-contemporary Benjamin Britten may be about the practicalities. He stretched things rather. Once some people could say perhaps he didn't always, think, is it playable right up the top end of a violin, as it are some of the vocal lines, not so much in Dance Clarion Air, but maybe once or twice in the operas, a bit hard. I don't really agree with that. I just think he had an imagination, his technique was solid, he knew what he was doing, and he just did stretch people both as performers and as listeners. He really was a wide-ranging composer. You come away from a work of Tippett and you feel you really have been somewhere else. You've really seen an imagination at work.
It's very life-enhancing music.
It's completely life-enhancing music, and that's why I've lived with it and loved it all my life. And it comes through, he knew music of all periods, and he loved music of all periods, and it's in there. There's everything from jazz to Charles Ives, to some sort of pop music and sort of protest songs and things like that. But not a note of it isn't Tippett. He was able to use all that extraordinary imagination for what went on in the past, and actually look to the future, particularly in some of his later works. Some of the later operas, yet rather like Stravinsky did, actually. Stravinsky pinched even more than Tippett, actually. But Stravinsky and Tippett were able to make it absolutely their own. How they did it, I would need longer to explain or have explained to me, to be honest.
You mentioned Benjamin Britten, and it seems, to me, I suppose, anyway, it seems interesting and perhaps instructive to sort of compare and contrast these two extraordinary composers.
Absolutely. They come in. They're put together, aren't they? They're linked. They were friends. They had their slight falling out. So Britten, of course, was a little bit younger, but died a great deal earlier. Michael's life was much longer. I think we are very lucky to have them both. They are in many ways very different, but they came from the same stable. And this lover, for instance, Henry Purcell, and going back to old music and using that as an inspiration. They shared that. They did a particular, for the countertenor voice, right from Alfred Deller back after the war, and what they did for that music and bringing Purcell forward was fantastic. Yet they did go in many ways in different directions in their music. Britten was much more practical, and that is not to say he wasn't a great composer too. My God, we're just lucky to have them both. But you compare, say, Peter Grimes, which is a great, great piece in the theatre, a great, great piece of drama, much the more famous piece than, say, The Midsummer Marriage, which was Tippett's first opera, which for me, contains as great, if not greater music than Peter Grimes, yet as a theatrical experience, it doesn't ring at your heartstrings in the way that Peter Grimes does. So they were, but the music is of the highest order in both pieces. It's extraordinary that England, which was for 300 years das Land ohne Musik, as the Germans called us, from sort of really Harry Elgar onwards, has produced all these composers and going on producing them, and you've got a snapshot of them in the City Hall on Saturday night. It's quite a phenomenon, really.
Well, one cannot be struck by the sheer range and variety of what's on offer on Saturday. Did you yourself have a hand in programming it?
Yes, I did. I mean, I did, but Raymond Choi, the very energetic chairman, and knows more about music than the rest of us, I think. I mean, he has a love for this and knows his stuff, and he said this is what he wanted. He wanted a cappella and with organ in one case, with cello, snapshot really of what was from roughly sort of Herbert Howells, who's the oldest composer on show, through to the younger living composers. He wanted a snapshot of British choral music. He studied and worked in London, so he knows the scene well. And so he came up, as I think he's right, I'm merely a guest here. It fitted his program, fitted the program of what the Bach choir wanted, and I didn't take a second for me to say, yes, let's do it. Then we prune it and make sure it's manageable, and some notable names are not there, one of which we've just been mentioning. There is no Benjamin Britten, but there is some Tippett, and the reason for that, I think, is probably that I actually knew every composer in the program, from my teacher, Kenneth Layton, to my great guru, Michael Tippett, to Rory Boyle, whose toccata we're hearing, who was best man at my wedding, right through to wonderful people like Jonathan Dove and Julian Terico Regan. And so I'm thrilled that Raymond wanted to go into that area, and then we worked out what could work in terms of rehearsal time and program and so forth.
And so some of these composers are relatively younger, very much living, working composers. And would you say that the choral scene in the UK at the moment is thriving, alive and well?
Yes, I would. I mean, we've got obviously all our famous choirs of all shapes and sizes. I mean, this is one thing we Brits we really do that well. There's let's give praise where it's due. We really do. I think it is. I think singing in schools is coming back. There's been a Martha scheme which used Music of Rum, which has got singing into primary schools, I think, up to about 95% now. It did go under a little bit a couple of decades back, but right across the piece, I think singing is there. There are some bad places where singing doesn't happen enough in schools, which is the way I want to answer the question, because I think that's where the next generation comes through, obviously. But in general, yes, some choirs up and down the country, across, choral societies and so forth, I would say in pretty good shape. Composition-wise, it's in good shape. There are a lot of some famous names, some of which are missing for our concert in City Hall on Saturday. But there are some pieces by people who are wonderful composers, say someone like Julian Anderson, who is not so well known in the choral field. And one of the reasons I'm pleased with Raymond's choice, or our choice, is that we brought some people in. We haven't just brought the normal, some of the more hackneyed ones. That doesn't mean they're not very good, but we hear about them. We brought in some people who are writing beautifully for the choir, who aren't quite so well known, and I hope that will make it interesting for people.
And I'm just scanning the publicity that I'm reading as you're talking, and Terico Regan, Grammy nominated. Is he a sort of rising star?
I think so. I've known Tarek since he was still a student, and I've watched his progress, and he's a very determined man. He's a very serious composer, lovely guy, very friendly. I think he's carving out a voice which is not unique, but it's got a special way of setting words, and I think he's going to slowly but surely come into the scene a very great deal more. He's not an immediate sort of, meteor coming onto the scene. Go back to Britten and Tippett. Tippett was not. Tippett took a long time to develop. It wasn't really into his 40s that he wrote some of the pieces we now know and love. Britten, however, was producing unbelievable things at school. People go at different speeds, and I think Tariq is going at a steady speed, neither really slow at the beginning nor going incredibly fast. So I watch him with great interest, and I'm pleased he's doing so well.
And then going back to the earliest of the composers you're representing, that's Herbert Howells, I think you mentioned. You talked about the stable of Benjamin Britten and Michael Tippett, Henry Purcell and so on. Was Herbert Howells brought up mainly in the sort of English cathedral tradition?
Well, yes, he had great Gloucester Cathedral and St John's, Cambridge pedigree. He knew his older music and, of course, set older pieces and pavans and all that sort of stuff, so he was in on the act as well. I think the difference is he used the music of Purcell and the madrigalists and Dowland, to mention the people that Britten and Tippett used. He used them rather less in his actual pieces, certainly in the Requiem we're going to hear, but he was still steeped in that but I think he hadn't taken it on to quite the extent that the Britten Tippett and then the next generation of British composers like Peter Maxwell Davies and Harry Birtwistle, who went further and went right back to the medieval period for their inspiration. Howells, it kind of seeped into him more, and he also was in that tradition where you still can hear some Wesley and some Parry. It doesn't sound like it, but if you really listen, it's there. So, but forged with a rather different harmonic language than Britten and Tippett. Tippett was very much a contrapuntalist anyway, and Britten was a cleaner, slightly more modern language. Howells is an extraordinary language, and somebody you can hear Howells and he couldn't be behind anybody else. For me, that alone is something special about him. He's got a turn of phrase and a turn of harmony and a wistfulness that is only his. And this Requiem is an extraordinary moving work which he didn't allow to be published because he wrote it, and very soon after that his son of 9 died, and he was too distraught to let a work like a Requiem be performed. So it took until I think the 80s before it was published and allowed out.
Oh, goodness me, how sad. And so it received its first performance as recently as that?
Well, it was, yes, to be honest, I don't know when the first performance was. I'd have to check my notes, but it certainly was, I think, but Howells died, I think, in 83, and I think it was found in the Royal College of Music and edited, and he allowed it out soon before he died. So, we now have it, but for his lifetime, he didn't have it sung.
Well, I mean, this program requires a great deal of versatility from your choir. Yeah. Do you think they'll rise to the challenge?
Yes, I mean, they've been wonderfully prepared by Bethan Greaves, who's an English singer out here who's singing solos. Because obviously, it's much as I'd love to be in Hong Kong for 2 months, doing 2 rehearsals a week for 2 months is simply not practical for anybody concerned. So there has to be, as it were, a chorus master. But she's done a wonderful job. Yes, and I think it's stretching them. There's no question that this is. The choir that is doing sort of Bach and Verdi and Brahms with big orchestra more, this is a stretch, but I think it's a very exciting move for them, this audition chamber choir they have. I think it shows great enterprise and their commitment to it, and their moving between the styles, as you say, and getting the notes learned so you can move. But that's one of the difficulties of a more modern program, is that the notes are hard and they take time, and you can't stop at just getting the notes in the right place. You now have to move on and look at how the poems are set, what colour of sound is wanted, what the composer wanted, and how the interpretations work. And that, with quite a number of short works, is, as you imply, rather harder, because each one has got its own feel, its own world that it has to inhabit. And yes, they have to be quicksilver and move between those very quickly. And we're having a wonderful time.
Well, yeah, a challenge and a joy. Nicholas Cleobury, it's been a great pleasure talking with you, and an exciting prospect on Saturday. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
The English conductor, Nicholas Cleobury, they're talking about British choral music. Let's just hear a little bit of Herbert Howells's music. We'll hear the opening of the Requiem Aeternam movement from his Hymnus Aeternam.